During these sessions, TLA champions, Stellenbosch University or TAO fellows share their research, innovations, and experiences about teaching learning assessment with colleagues. So our topic for today is cultivating futures, supporting student success through the STEM extended curriculum program and beyond. And as colleagues hopefully know by now, student success is part of the broader academic renewal vision of our new VC, Prof. Daresh. So the topic of today could not be more, for want of a better term, topical today. It's also then my pleasure to introduce our speaker of today, Dr. Marnel Mouton. So Dr. Mouton is a senior lecturer in the Department of Botany and Zoology. She holds a PhD in microbiology from the University of the Free State and has been with us since 2006. Over the years, she has taught a wide range of biological topics to diverse groups of undergrad students enrolled in science, agri-sciences, and health sciences. Since 2019, she has also served as module coordinator for the 4 first-year biology modules and the STEM Extended Curriculum Program, or ECP. These roles sparked a strong interest in STEM education and led to research projects focused on evaluating and addressing key challenges, particularly the articulation gap between school and first year of higher education. Her academic focus now lies in science education with a particular emphasis on improving student success. She draws on legitimation code theory and other research frameworks to investigate how teaching practices and curriculum design can support epistemological and ontological access for students, especially those entering higher education from underserved schooling contexts. As a committed science education scholar, Dr. Mouton is passionate about cultivating student potential and believes that student success is about more than academic achievement, again, within the broader vision of our VC, that under academic renewal, the holistic student is of crucial importance. So it goes beyond academic achievement. It also involves identity formation and a sense of belonging, personal growth, and the development of a broad set of skills. She strives to advance student success through a focus on curricular transformation, educational equity, and knowledge-building frameworks in higher education. Marnel has been a recipient of various TLA awards as the SU Teaching Excellence Awards, a first-year achievement award, as well as teaching fellowship. If I can go to the presentation and just briefly introduce the presentation. For her SU Teaching Fellowship, Marnel explored the transformative role of the STEM Extended Curriculum Program in widening access, supporting student development, and fostering academic success in the STEM fields. Grounded in her experience as an educator, coordinator, and educational researcher, she will highlight key challenges and successes in navigating the complex intersection between readiness challenges and actualizing potential. At the core of this is the importance of a manageable transition into higher education, strong supportive and support structures, a sense of belonging, committed academic staff, intentional skills development, and solid foundational knowledge building, all contributing to student agency, improved retention, higher throughput, and more purposeful academic journeys. In this seminar, Dr. Mouton further explores the institutional conditions necessary for success in higher education through lessons learned from the ECP. Through evidence-based insights, she aims to share how intentional, student-centered engagement may drive both academic achievement and personal growth, thus student success. With that, over to you, Dr. Mouton.
Thank you so much, Professor Stevens. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm just quickly going to share my presentation with you. Nicolene, can you just confirm when you can see it, please?
I'll do. It's coming. There you are. Thank you, Marnel.
And hopefully you can only see the slide and not my notes.
Yes.
Okay. So, colleagues, I'm excited today to share with you the outcomes of my SU Teaching Fellowship. This fellowship has been a journey for me, both. It's been a real honor and a privilege to do it. It also connected me with fellow educators who share the same passions as me for our students and their learning. And it also then gave me an opportunity to do some research that I really wanted to do for a long time and that I really loved doing. So my own journey with the ECP started back in 2013. I'm just going to, my camera put it off. My own journey with the ECP started back in 2013 when I was appointed as a lecturer for the ECP, the biology lecturer, but also for other biology modules at that stage, especially for the occupational therapy students. And what these two modules had in common is that they were characterized by smaller class sizes. And that gave me the opportunity to get to know the students and to actually see them as individuals, each one of them on their own path of growth and discovery and trying to find, where they belong in this world. And that is why I've titled this presentation Cultivating Futures. So it's about student success through the ECP, but I think it also applies to a wider field because in my experience, student success is about a lot more than just academic achievement. And that is also why I chose this image here, because I think there's a lot more happening there that has to do with student success than we as academics might like to admit sometimes. So on this topic of student success, for me, these images really captures our challenge at Stellenbosch University, and I think in the whole of South Africa and probably also globally, because this is from the University of Southern California. So we all would like to see an equal world where there would be equal opportunities for all. But we know that the world is far from an equal place and that some people will always be more advantaged and others will be disadvantaged to some extent. So one of the ideas in higher education was to then bring in more a greater variety, diversity of students into our universities. And the problem with this is that often we just bring more students into this still unequal pathway if we do not find ways to support them to become successful students. And this is where equity is different. And I know Prof. Deresh often mentions equity. So in contrast, equity redirects the resources and the pathways, or to the pathways where the greatest needs are, with the intention to fix the barriers and then provide support to eventually then do this towards student success. Okay, so these two, let's call them concepts, student access and student success, they are really complex, let's call it multifaceted matters in higher education. Access obviously refers to opportunity and placement, but it's also about a lot more than that. It's also about epistemological and ontological access for these students. Student success is about graduation rates, but also the quality of the offerings, the skills the students obtain during their time here, how prepared they are eventually for the work environment, and then eventually how employable they are. So there's a lot more to this than just these definitions that we often see. Now, access to higher education for all South Africans has improved significantly, at least since the early 1990s, with participation rates that increased to 15% in 2000 and then to 18% in 2010. And this growth, however, is still far from sufficient to meet our human resources needs. And therefore, a new goal has been set to have a participation goal of 30% by the year 2030, which sounds really good. However, Many other countries, developing countries such as in Latin America, would be on 50% by the year 2030. So there's a lot more work to be done there. When it comes to student success in South Africa, we know that only 1 in 4 students at contact institutions complete their degrees in regulation or minimum time, and just under half of the students graduate under 5 years. The problem with this is that the white students' completion rates are still approximately 50% higher than that of our Black African students. And this is really concerning in view of the fact that so many interventions and policy changes have been implemented over the years to improve this negative trend. And we know many of the reasons for this, such as the lack of preparedness, socioeconomic factors that play a role, cultural differences, challenges with language, underserved schooling experiences, the articulation gap, and I can go on about this. So Kresge Foundation is they regard the establishment of the so-called extended curriculum programs, also known as the ECPs, as one of the most meaningful systemic interventions to respond to this call for enhancing equitable access and success in South Africa. So the whole idea of this ECP was to create a curriculum space needed to enable our talented but most probably underprepared students to achieve sound foundations then to become successful in higher education. Now, at Stellenbosch University, quite a few of our faculties do offer ECPs, but we follow different models. I'm involved with the so-called STEM ECP, which covers the faculties of science, agri-sciences, and engineering. And in the STEM ECP, the model that we follow have a separate foundation year, where after students, when they complete the foundation year, then simply go on with the other years of their degree program that they are registered for. Now, during that foundation year, we focus on epistemological and ontological access, and we do so, firstly, by developing their fundamental knowledge, and that is now in the STEM subjects, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, and technical drawings. And here we try to bridge possible gaps in understanding and knowledge that these students came with from school. But equally important, we strive to develop essential soft skills and also academic literacy and computer skills, and because we know that these skills are extremely important for success in higher education. So this is our goal and what we aim to do, but often, we don't often know whether we succeed in doing so. So therefore, the overarching topic and question of my teaching fellowship was how did the STEM ECP contribute then to equitable access and success at SU? Now for this, I used the data from 7 cohorts, 2010 to 2016, simply because most of these students were most likely to have finished by the time that my study started. So the study had 2 phases, a quantitative phase and then a qualitative study following that. And I'm very happy to say that we were able to publish 2 conference proceeding papers from this, and then 2 full papers, one showing the quantitative data and then about the qualitative study, the second one. So as a research framework, I used the work of York and co-workers. Now, they did a very comprehensive review of this term called academic success, and they found that it's interchangeably used also as student success. So more or less meaning that the same thing in literature. They also found that academic success is often reduced just by looking at academic achievement and graduation rates. So it's and they then proposed a new amended theoretical grounded definition of this term with 6 constituents. So according to them, there are 6 things that you need to look at or evaluate when you are talking about student success. So firstly would be obviously academic development, but also satisfaction, acquisition of skills, Persistence, that ties in with academic achievement because it's mostly about graduation rates. Then also the attainment of learning objectives, and then lastly, career success. So it's about a lot more than just academic achievement. So for my quantitative study, I looked at academic achievement and persistence, and these would just basically give you the cold hard facts. Okay, so the data was obtained from information governance here at SU, and then data analysis was done by the Center for Statistical Consultation here at SU using cross-tabulation, ANOVA, Levene tests, and all ordinal multinomial analysis in R, so just a lot of stats. So what did we find? And this was very interesting, especially when you now later compare it to the qualitative data. So what we found is that these 7 cohorts included just over 1,000 students, 1,025. Most were taken in by the Faculty of Science, followed by Engineering, and then Agri-Sciences. The numbers fluctuated slightly over the years. One of the aims with this equity is also within bringing more female students into these STEM faculties. And as you can see, science brought many female students into the faculties, followed then by agri-sciences and engineering through this ECP program. We also had to look at the race profile because we were looking at equitable access and success. And when we look at the 1,025 students, most were colored, followed by Black, African, and then white and Indian students. And we also looked at the home language profile, and we found that then English and Afrikaans students, followed by Xhosa, Zulu, and then other African languages. So what does the stats tell us? Of the 1,025 students, 501 students graduated by the time that my study was done. What is interesting here is to look at how long they took to graduate, and here you can see that approximately 73% of them graduated within minimum time or minimum time plus 1 year. A further 26% of them took longer to graduate. We're always looking for predictors of success, and here what we had available in terms of data was the matric mark average, and then the golden line here, the foundation year average, and then the green line represents the graduation rates. And the statistics told us basically that the foundation year average was a good predictor for graduation eventually. What was also significant to see was the number of these graduates that went on to achieve postgraduate degrees and also diplomas. You can see here from PhD degrees to then teaching diplomas. In these include 78 colored students, 28 Black African, 48 white, and 1 Indian student. And by this time of my study, a further 25 were registered for master's degrees and 10 were registered for PhD degrees. Some of these students might have actually finished by now. Also, what we had to look at was the diversity profile at intake versus graduation. So you can see here, for instance, for the Faculty of Science, this is the colored, the Black African, the white students, and Indian. And although we do lose students, we find that this diverse profile is actually retained to graduation, which was very good news, especially for science. In engineering, a few more, I think, white students graduated than actually what started out. If we compare this to the mainstream, you can see a completely different picture. We must remember that the ECPs only represent a small portion of the full cohort for each year, about 10%. But when we compare the intake, we can see that the ECPs have a much more diverse profile than that of our mainstream for the corresponding years. And also at graduation, you can see it. So in that sense, the ECP did actually contribute to equitable access. In terms of our female graduates, these are graduates. You can see that many colored and Black African women were able to graduate in these faculties through the ECP, and most of them graduated in the Faculty of Science, followed by Agri-Sciences, and then also Engineering. We also had to take a look at dropout rates, and we can see that unfortunately our Black African students still have the highest dropout rate, followed by the colored and then the white students. And when we look at the home languages of the dropouts or the students who do not graduate, we can see that the isiXhosa students has a really high dropout rate if we compare them, for instance, to the other Black African languages, which was a very interesting finding. So the conclusions of the quantitative study, I can say that our current STEM ECP actually provided access to a diverse group of students, and it actually facilitated success for many of them, and we were able to maintain that diverse profile up to graduation. We also have to keep in mind here that these students would not have been at university if they had not been granted access through the ECP. So it's therefore significant to see that over these 7 cohorts, we had 501 graduates and 155 postgraduate qualifications. And I think this number would be slightly higher by now. So that was the quantitative study. Now we're going to look at the qualitative study. Okay, so the quantitative study looked at academic achievement and persistence, whereas the qualitative study now considered 3 more of these constituents, namely satisfaction, acquisition of skills and competencies, as well as career success. Now, these were the research questions, and so this is basically giving us the student voice for that data that we just saw there. The research questions was then, how did the ECP opportunity impact on students' lives during and after their studies at the institution? What aspects of the STEM ECP did they value most? What attributes did they develop as a result of the ECP, and what can be improved on? So you can see that these were rather open-ended questions that allowed students to actually express whatever they found were the most significant ones. And this actually reminded me of the work of my colleagues, Taryn Bernard, who said that you have to understand the perception and the context of the students. And also Debbie Blaine, who also advocated for the student voice to be heard when we're looking at these stories. So we used the same 7 cohorts. Invitations were randomly sent out via WhatsApp. 25 students replied and they agreed to participate in the study. Online interviews were conducted by an independent interviewer, and this was so that the students would feel comfortable to actually be honest about their experiences. The interviews were recorded and transcribed, and then eventually data analysis was done through a process of analytic regression as described by Miles and Huberman. So just something about the participants and the demographics of them, because obviously it was important to have representatives of all the year groups, of all the relevant race groups, of all the faculties. And what was also important to us was to have graduates and non-graduates. And I'm talking now about SU non-graduates. So you can see here that these students were from all the relevant race groups and then from all 3 the faculties. So according to us, when we started, there were 15 SU graduates and 10 SU dropouts, according to the stats. They did span all the cohorts, so that was a good thing. And this is where it gets interesting, because through the study, we found that of the 10 non-graduates, 9 students went on to graduate at other institutions of higher education, and only 1 student never graduated. So this already painted a different picture than the one that we saw in the stats. And that reminds me of what Cecilia Jacobs always used to say, and she said that the qualitative data gives you such rich stories, and I now understand that. So this is just an interesting question that we started off with. And the question was, do you think you would have been able to graduate successfully if you hadn't been part of the ECP? And not a single student said yes. Most said no. Some were not asked the question. And those that kind of were positive said, yeah, but, you know, it would have taken much longer or something like that. So not one of them said yes. Okay, so this looks a bit different now to what it looked like on my screen, but anyway. So you can see here over the data set, 18 themes were developed, and that is now across the data set. And from the 18 themes, 7 overarching theme clusters were developed to incorporate all the themes. This is a pie chart that would actually give you the proportions of the data. So one can see here that skills gains during the ECP and the years thereafter was very prominent overarching theme. Support was also, there was a lot of talk about support, but not maybe in the way that we would think. Then the students spoke about themselves, obviously, because as they came into higher education, their background, their identity, their attitudes, and then eventually talking about where they are now. And that was very interesting and quite inspiring. A bit was said about the institution, and I can safely say it was mostly positive. Some challenges and needs were voiced. They spoke a lot about the value of the program, a lot in terms of it preparing them, but also giving them the opportunity to study in higher education. And then here they talked about the knowledge building, which is obviously the foundations laid in these science disciplines to actually lay the foundations for the further studies in these disciplines. So when you look at this, it is very interesting to see. We as academics focus so much on the academic part. If you look at this, we can see there's only this little portion that has directly to do with academics. And all the rest is about basically the whole student experience. I'm quickly going to show you some of the comments. I'm not going to go through all of them because that will take all day. So in terms of the value and the affordances of the STEM ECP, this student said that it gave her the opportunity to study in higher education, basically, to pursue her dreams, to pursue the career that she has now and that she also always wanted to pursue. This one talked about that ECP is like the ideal way to enter university, a great way with the smaller classes and the more accessible lecturers. This one talked about how it helped you to adjust academically, but also emotionally and mentally, and that there was a lot of support in that transition. The knowledge building, as we would expect, talk about the foundations laid in the STEM disciplines, but also about that the ECP actually was an easier bridge for them. So basically a stepping stone from school going then into higher education. And then this one was talking about, especially our students coming from underserved schooling systems, they often don't have things like practicals and laboratories and things like that. And the ECP exposed them to those experiences. So when they got to first year, they knew exactly what to do and was expected of them. So it basically also bridged that knowledge gap that they had. In terms of skills, there was a lot said about skills, and this is about being and becoming successful participants in higher education, but also now as employees. And it included many personal and life skills, learning skills, and professional skills. So a lot was said about how the EDP prepared them. This one said, for instance, how to manage my time. This one said, it helped me to see here in this new setting what is expected of me. And this was an interesting one that never ever crossed my mind. It's the way that people speak English in different ways. They said that they had teachers in school that spoke English, but those were Black African teachers. And when they came here, there were other teachers and they had different accents and it was very hard to understand them, which I never ever thought about. So she said it prepared me to be able to comprehend the context without the language being a barrier. And then this one just said in the end, listen, remember we were taught the skills and it reminded us to lean back onto those skills that we had learned. So a lot was said about skills. Now support, when we think of support, we immediately think of something like the CSCD, and yes, they spoke a lot about that. But the strongest theme that came out here was the peer support. There was a lot said about peer support. Like this one, who said, I think because of the friends that I made in the EDP, the rest of my years were a lot easier because then I had more connections. I could get more help. And then the second most important theme here was the connection to the lecturers. Now, this was the ECP lecturers, and very little was said about other lecturers ever. So they said that in the ECP, they were able to connect with these lecturers. They really connected with us personally. They knew our names, for instance. I think it made us feel it was a safer space. So a lot was said about this relationship and these connections with these ECP lecturers. Quite a few challenges and needs were voiced, like especially reminding us that students need to be mentally and emotionally healthy to succeed. This one reminding us, remember, there's a human being behind those academics. There's a person so overwhelmed, so stressed. Please remember that. And then this one is something we can actually do something about. This, a few of them actually mentioned this, that they needed academic support throughout their studies, not just in their ECP year and in their first year thereafter. They felt that there were some hurdle modules later on, and there was not enough academic support there. They also felt that they may have been able to graduate even earlier if it was not for those hurdle modules and if they had better academic support there. So this is something that we've spoken a lot about already, but this is something we can definitely look at. Okay, so the final level of this process of analytic progression, as described by Miles Nuberman, comprises considering the data within an explanatory framework, as I've done here. So this is basically just how we organize these findings. So you can see here that this big block here is now higher education. This is a very specific setting, the academic and institutional culture here at Stellenbosch University. So our first year students, let's call them mainstream first year students, come into university. They start with the undergraduate degree program. They all are eventually, they have challenges, academic and personal challenges, and depending on how mature they are, how many skills they have, how strong their confidence is, they can then become successful or not. Now, the extended curriculum program is a bit different. And remember now that this is the student voice. This is the result from the student voice. They come into the ECP foundation year. This is now in the STEM fields. This represents a slower transition, helping them to bridge this articulation gap into then their undergraduate degree programs. They will also face these challenges, but hopefully they will have skills and they will eventually become successful students. Now, during this ECP foundation year, there is this space. Remember at the beginning, I said that the idea is to create this space where certain things can happen. And according to them, this is indeed, they often called it a space as well, where this foundational knowledge building could take place, where the articulation gap could be actually mitigated to some extent, but also a place where they could develop crucial skills for studies in higher education, things like time management, collaboration with peers, and many others. And also, they were able to establish crucial support structures, especially with their peers and with these lecturers that they often went back to afterwards. And it was a time for them of identity formation, getting to know this institution and finding your own identity within this institution and building that self-confidence. And this makes a big difference according to them. Okay, so the student voice from this study reminds us again to look not just at academic content and achievement, but to focus on the whole student experience. So according to them, what matters towards student success? Firstly, it matters to have a solid knowledge and understanding of these foundational subjects. It matters to have a manageable transition into higher education. It matters to have positive classroom experiences and meaningful interactions with the lecturers. It is very important to develop effective support structures and meaningful connections, and to develop a sense of belonging And eventually it matters to develop a wide range of skills for success in higher education. Things like, I said, time management, learning to collaborate, academic literacies, and many, many others. And eventually developing a strong sense of identity within this new environment that you're in. And it reminds me again of the words of authors such as George Koo, who pointed out that students come to university, they have all these past life and educational experiences, and they are also products of their family and their cultural, social, and political and educational environments. And some are just better prepared for studies in higher education than others. So what can we take forward from this? How can we implement this maybe on a wider scale, looking at our mainstream programs as well? And this is just some ideas from my side, and we've used this in our faculty to some extent, especially in support programs. One idea is to look again at something called differentiated learning. That's an approach to teaching that recognizes and responds to this wide range of needs, abilities, and learning styles, and even interests, instead of just using this one-size-fits-all method where we lecture and we walk away. So using this process, the educators can adapt the content, the process, and the assessment to meet learners where they are and to help them succeed in this way. And what has been shown in literature is that differentiated learning has benefits to all students. So whether they are on the one end and they need more support, or on the other end and need more challenge, it has been shown to make all students feel included, motivated, and capable of achieving success. Now, somebody like Vygotsky, and I also thought of him, he didn't propose differentiated instruction, but his ideas also strongly influenced differentiated practices, especially the socio-cultural theory of learning, which explains how learning happens through social interaction, cultural tools, and language, and also that it's not just an individual process, but it's deeply shaped by the social and cultural context in which it occurs. Others also come to mind, such as Tinto's integration theory. Tinto argues that students are more likely to succeed and persist if they are academically and socially integrated into the institution. And then also Aston's involvement theory. It says that the more students are involved emotionally, socially, and academically, the more they learn and succeed. Now, what these theories point out and what they basically have in common is that academic or student success is deeply tied to social connection, support, and also skills development. And this is exactly what I also found in my study. And this brings me just back to my own ways of doing things and my own teaching philosophy. So I'm an academic, I teach biology, so for me, I want them to learn biology, and it's hard sometimes not to get agitated when they're busy with all other things except that, it seems sometimes. So I want to end off by saying that one of the greatest privileges of working with students is seeing the potential that sometimes even they don't see or yet see themselves. Every student carries a spark of possibility, and our role is to nurture it, guide it, and create the kind of environment where it can grow into purpose. So cultivating their futures means walking alongside them, even if it's just for a small period of time, as they discover their strengths, overcome the challenges, and begin to shape a life that is not only successful, but also meaningful. Thank you. So I want to end off with this image again, because I need to remind myself again that a lot more happens there towards student success than what we often think. Thank you.
Thank you, Marnel. Thank you very much for sharing with us your research, your passion, your care for your students, all of that. It is really visible in everything that you've shared with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I didn't see any questions in the chat. Sorry if I've missed something, but if you have questions that you would like to ask or comments you want to make to Marnel, you're welcome to switch on your camera and just start talking. Otherwise, I do have one or two questions that I would like to ask, but I would first like to give you an opportunity.
Hi, Nicoline. Hi, Marnel. Thanks for your presentation. It's actually really encouraging to see the results, because we often think that you know, that the ECP project is that we kind of drop the students and that they don't eventually graduate. But it's really nice to see the yes but and those students that if they don't make it here, they make it elsewhere. One thing that you mention, well, there's two things. So first of all, you know, they then, for engineering, they then come to us at engineering, and then all of a sudden, like, the carpet is ripped out from underneath them because they don't have the small class and the nurturing support to the extent that they had it with the ECP program. And then the other thing is that level of support is not presented to our mainstream students, and I think a lot of them could also benefit from that. So I'm just wondering, like, how much of that support, like, it's helping the ECP students succeed, but I think it could also help our mainstream students to succeed. And but of course, then you get the question of the expense, you know, the resource expense of giving such individual support to our students, and all the issues that come with the massification of education.
Yeah.
So what do you think that the mainstream students are any different from the EDP students in that they don't need that support, whereas the ECP students need that support? Maybe the mainstream students need just as much support.
I think there's a lot more support needed, and other lecturers will tell you that they often have these TATs and other support sessions, and students don't come to it, and that is the other question: why don't they come to it? I often also see that the ones who really struggle are not they don't always realize that they're struggling, you know. And I think that is the one thing of the ECP: they are all in the same boat there, and the structure and the support is there. So, you know, and that is one of the reasons why I think it is so prominent, according to them, you know, that support, because. And it also depends on who you're asking. You know, if you ask students who are now in their second or third year, they will say different things to these students who have now gone through the whole thing, and they actually now realize how important that was. So, yeah, I think students need a lot more support. And I think these events where they can actually build these support structures, because support is not always just academic support as we see it, you know, in terms of offering a TAT, helping them, you know, with basically the knowledge part. A lot of that has to do with is social structures. And I know we have so many different cultures, so this is not an easy thing to fix, but I think there should be more time for development of those things. And I think our curriculums start off at a pace, as you know, with your first years in engineering, for instance. You know, there's no time for them to adapt. They just have to swim. And maybe there is a problem there. And I don't know how you do a more gradual transition into higher education so that you do have more skills, you know, going forward. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions. It's a very tough one, as you say. The engineering students did have quite a few other suggestions that I obviously didn't have time to mention here. Things as having programming, for instance, you know, as a module. You know, even more complex versions of the mathematics. So they had quite a few different things. But when I spoke to others about it, they were not positive that that's actually doable in terms of implementing that into the ECP. Yeah, so that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, actually, on that, I was just speaking to somebody the other day, another lecturer, about not necessarily the programming support, but the computer support, the computer skills support. And he mentioned something that I hadn't even thought of, but there was a student that he was helping who had never used a computer before, didn't know how to use a mouse. He was teaching the student how to use the mouse. And I was saying, oh, was the student from an under-resourced school or something like that? So he said, no, he was from a normal middle-class student, but at high school, they did everything on tablets. They don't use computers. And I think that's something that I hadn't even thought of. Like,
Yes.
I think that that's something that we're not even thinking about is, so there's also the problem that you've got students who have never used anything other than maybe a smartphone. And then now you also are getting a bigger set of students who maybe have never used a computer, and now we expect them to use computers. And that's something that's a big support thing that we need. I know at UCT, they have, for all of their students, a computer literacy course.
Yes.
That's maybe something that we need to think about.
Yeah, that's also a strength of the ECP. They have a whole year of computer literacy, computer skills development. So that definitely helps a lot of them. But yes, that's true. Many of them do work on tablets. I could also see that in my class.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Marnel. I see there's a question from Joseph Mangadi, Marnel, and he would like to know whether your study also looked at which schools the students came from.
We didn't consider the schools the students came from. I often look at where they come from. What I found, and this is now nothing to do with my study, what I found, like in experience with coordination of the ECP, is that if we have problem with students, they are often from more privileged schools in the ECP. So that is just something very interesting. And I mean, the other day I looked again and the same thing, you kind of recognize that pattern. So no, we didn't look at that, but remember now, for the ECP, you should actually be from a disadvantaged background, unless if you came from a more privileged school, there would be some documentation needed of why you need access through the ECP. So it's not just the easy way in for students coming from more privileged schools. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mr. Mangadi, do you want to switch on your mic?
Hi, Joseph. Yeah, no, thank you very much. You have answered my question. The reason I'm asking is that it was very interesting that in some instances, especially at UCT, what they found that is that some of the more privileged students were actually part of the ECP program. So even though they can be classified as Black, African, and colored, but actually in terms of their background, they are from a privileged background, but they still ended up in the ECP program. So I think it's very interesting when we normally assume that everybody who's in the ECP is actually from from a lower quintile school. So I think it's very interesting to take that into cognition when we look at ECP students.
Yes. So often students who had some problems, for instance, a parent died during their matric year or something like that, then they would consider that, but they need the documentation for that. So during intake, those people who sit with those documents, they take all those things into consideration. So it's not really for students coming from privileged schools, because according to us, they already had the opportunity. So you can't just get into the ECP because you were lazy at school, if I can call it that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you so much. It seems that people have to leave. Just remember the feedback form, please, colleagues. And then Marnel, I see Albert from AgriScience said that maybe we need to have more information sessions about the ECP in our faculties, etc., to share the message about the ECP, because I know there are also some people think about it in ways of stigmatizing, etc., and to also break through those thoughts. Then a lot of compliments and thanking you for excellent presentation and a excellent study, all of that. So thank you very much. Colleagues, any other questions from Marnel? Those of us who are still in the room. If not, then Marnel, I'm just throwing something out here. I know many years ago there was a study did at UCT for a national study, and they suggested a 4-year formative undergrad degree for all students. Do you think there might be value in it? Also linking to Debbie's question.
Yes, I do think there will be value in it, because I think it will actually allow students, like with the ECP, that space to develop certain skills and attributes that is much needed then for success in higher education. So I think, even students from privileged schools, if I sometimes see how much they struggle, because they have to find themselves in this, and develop this new identity. And I think having that more gradual transition will definitely help towards that. So in my opinion, that would be great. I think it will be wonderful to have the option for some students to be able to then, so maybe looking at that differentiated idea, students that can then graduate earlier, but that it would be normal then to graduate within 4 years, because we know that most actually do take longer to graduate. So yes, and I think it will be less stigmatized in that way. Interestingly, talking about that, the students in this study, or the participants, most of them actually said they didn't really experience that. There were 1 or 2 who said that they heard those stories, but they didn't really feel that they were disadvantaged in some way. So yeah, maybe because they had that feeling of belonging in that group. So it was, I know the study done by de Klerk et al. Earlier with Susan van Schalkwyk and them as well. They also talked about the stigmatization, but it didn't come out very strong in the study. There were 1 or 2 who mentioned it, but not in a way that they felt disadvantaged by it. So just interestingly.
Thank you. Joseph?
Thank you very much. Actually, it just dawned on me now is that I probably missed it in the presentation. Did the students indicate which skill in particular did they find most helpful throughout their university career?
Which what?
Which skill?
Skill.
Is a particular skill that they said this one actually was much more, beneficial throughout the academic than others?
Yes, I have to think back now, because I actually all that data I would take every one of them and look at the strongest one there. But definitely things like time management was a very strong one, and collaboration with others. Collaborating with others from diverse backgrounds was a very important one. Developing the language skills. So those were the most prominent ones that I can remember now. But time management was a big thing, and I think it's a big thing for most first years. These just had time, and they had a little bit more structure to actually learn those skills than most mainstream students. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Marnel. I thought maybe we can just, for those who are still in the call, Marnel said that the STEM ECP is with the foundation year. Some other models in other faculties is actually that they split the first year over 2 years. And I think always the question just is then about workload in year 2 that Debbie also referred to, or for the other ECP model, then it will be their 2nd academic year, but their 3rd year at university. When they go the full mainstream, then the workload issue, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely the workload will be an issue. And I think we've always said, can we throw out the timetable? We talked about the timetable. We actually proposed that maybe our students are now, I think they're now dropping physics completely from the first year engineering, when last I heard. But the idea was also that they actually take the first year physics and see, if they how they do in that module, and if they did not pass it, they could actually do the second semester physics module of the ECP. So that was an idea that we were looking at, because then at least they have a little bit less to do in their first year. But the timetable came up all the time as the thing that made it impossible. So I think there are things that one can do if we can solve this timetable issue.
I think we hit 2 o'clock now, but I'm just curious, Marnel, there was one of the objectives that you did not look at, the York objectives, the one about attainment of learning objectives.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious as to why not.
So in my opinion, that's not really something that you can look at afterwards, like I did now. You know, that's something that I think that needs to be done at module and program level, you know, closer to the time and where they are. That's not something I can do, you know, once they've graduated. So that is why I didn't take that one into account. And I think if you have to consider it, then you'll have to do, you know, plan the study differently. But that is the reason, yes. So you picked it up.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions for Marnel? Anybody in the room? Thank you very much, Marnel, and also congratulations on the publications and the conference presentations from your study. So obviously your work is traveling, which I think is fantastic. And I think it's also very useful for us here at Stellenbosch University, also with the Student Success Project. I don't know whether Melanie is in the room. You know, we can also learn from this because it is very contextual. So I think in my mind, that is also very important and obviously very valuable. So thank you so much. And thank you for agreeing for today, and all the best. Take care, all of you, colleagues.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Bye.